Hi, welcome to Squeeze TV, a YouTube channel dedicated to discussing and celebrating the music of the great South East London band Squeeze. This is going to hopefully be a lot of fun. So, going to jump in today fairly randomly and just talk about a song which I've always loved. It comes from the album Cosi Fan Tutti-Frutti, which came out in 1985. Of course, it was the band's comeback album. They'd broken up in 1982 and disappeared, well, sort of disappeared. Difford and Tilbrook went off and did the Difford and Tilbrook album, more of that in another video. And they came back for the album Cosi Fan Tutti-Frutti. I can still remember buying this album, bought it from Our Price in Wrexham, back in 1985. I've been a big Squeeze fan ever since 1979, the Cool for Cats album. I've been absolutely heartbroken when the group broke up in 82, and I didn't even know they'd come back. At the time, I was only, I would have been 14 at the time. Wasn't reading the music papers yet, so I had no idea that Squeeze had reformed. And I can remember going through the racks and finding this album in the CD racks, actually, before it even got a CD player. And I just couldn't believe it. I remember looking on the back and seeing the pictures and just seeing, wow, you know, Jools Holland's back in the group. I'll save these stories for when we come to look at the album, but let's just cut straight into the first track on the album, Big Beng, which obviously it's the first song on the album, and therefore it has some sort of significance, I think. The song that relaunched the group. It wasn't a single, but it's the first track, side one of the comeback album. And I suppose the first thing to notice about it is the huge electronic drum sound of Gilson Lavis, who at the time, I don't think Gilson had been too enamoured with the electronic percussive technology that was around at the time. My understanding of the situation is that Glenn Tilbrook had wanted Gilson to move more into that area. On the previous album, Sweets from a Stranger, there are some examples of electronic drums. Don't think Gilson was too keen, but then for some reason he just went for it on this album. I think it's a Simmons drum kit, could be mistaken, one of those electronic drum kits that were very common in the 80s. They had sort of hexagonal pads and you could just trigger samples, I guess. And the first thing you notice about this track is this explosion of high velocity synth drumming from Gilson. I don't think, looking back, it was necessarily the right moves for Squeeze. I don't think Gilson was that proud of the work he'd done later on. Don't think Difford and Tilbrook either were that keen on it. I know on the next album, Babylon and On, they reverted back to a traditional drum sound. But on this song, as on quite a few of the songs from this album, the Simmons drum kit or the electronic synth drum pads are very, very prevalent. I actually really like them. I think Gilson does some really tremendous playing. The song starts with this explosive drum barrage, and then it goes into this absolutely wild bass playing from the great Keith Wilkinson, who was the bass player that Difford and Tilbrook drafted in really to replace John Bentley in 1983. John had been the bass player previously from 1983 to 82. He came back to the band briefly for the reunion gig, which they'd done in London, but then he was let go. I think Difford and Tilbrook wanted to explore a different kind of bass sound. Keith Wilkinson was a session guy. He played on the Difford and Tilbrook album, of course, and he just had that sound, that 80s sound, that sort of fretless bass, doing all sorts of fancy, slidey kind of stuff. There were quite a few bass players around at the time who were exploring that sound. I know Colin Moulding was doing it in XTC, and you could hear it on Records by Japan, that kind of thing. Quick mention, I guess, of the electronic music that was around in the early 80s. This album and the song Big Beng, I think, were a definite attempt by Difford and Tilbrook to start exploring some of those 80s avenues, shall we say. And the combination of Gilson's electronic drums with Keith Wilkinson's bass guitar on Big Beng set a new mould, really, for Squeeze. It was a different sound. It was not the sound that we'd all been used to. Squeeze always had quite an organic sound. You know, think of the Farfisa organ and the electronic piano that Jools had used. You had the Hammond organ that Paul Carrack had used. Don Snow had used almost sort of harpsichordy keyboard sounds on Switch from a Stranger, but on this album it's synths all the way, and just that combination of Keith Wilkinson's bass and Gilson's drums on this track really do throw a stone into the water, really, and set the cat amongst the squeezed pigeons. Made us all realise that, we're definitely now in the 1980s, and Squeeze are venturing off into new waters. And I don't know whether it was universally loved at the time. I loved it. But what's great about Big Beng is that the songwriting is still really strong. It's just a really brilliant opening track to the album. Never been entirely sure what the song is about. Let's just have a quick look at the lyrics. So we've got the lyrics sheet here. Little elephant there, golden elephant. Not sure if that's a clue as to what the song means, but you've got these lyrics. The liberator of sin, the giver of delight. I took the drug and went out like a light. I giggled on the bed as I stared at the wall. I was the one who felt ever so small. I couldn't take it, I couldn't win with my thoughts. Forever playing chess and keeping reports on whatever I saw and whatever moved. I was an emperor for an hour. I had nothing else to do. The universe caved in, my legs fell away, but you didn't say that I would be you and you would be me. When I took the pill that put me to sleep, I couldn't take it, I couldn't spin all the plates. Forever in a minefield of personal games. What could I do? I was Caesar of Rome. Thank God I woke up to find you had come home. I guess you don't need to read too deeply into those lyrics, maybe, to discern that there may be something to do with drug taking, maybe drug addiction. I know during this time Chris Difford has gone on record in his biography that he'd been indulging in various substances, illicit substances, in the early 80s, and Glenn as well, I think, had some problems in that area at this time, but of course it was Chris that was writing the words, and there's some quite characteristic Chris Difford kind of lyrics here, this idea of, I couldn't spin all the plates, forever in a minefield of personal games. I love that. Chris always had a way of reflecting, being reflective in song and putting himself down a little bit. There was always that, at this time, there was always that element of self-reproach creeping in. That had been on Sweets from a Stranger, songs of sozzled self-reproach. And this idea of him being Caesar of Rome as well. I know Chris has written quite extensively in the past about this idea of being a pop star, and feeling like you're on top of the world, but it's all a bit superficial, and you're being plagued with doubts, and you're not quite sure how well you're doing in terms of your own self-esteem. And Chris certainly had issues with that as the 80s progressed. But yeah, and it's fairly explicit. I took the drug and went out like a light. I giggled on the bed as I stared at the wall. It kind of reminds me, there are certain other songs by Chris. There's a song on the different Tilbrook album, isn't there? On My Mind Tonight, which I know he wrote that when he was just basically on his own in the house, taking drugs in the middle of the night and kind of staring at the wall and going a little bit mad. I sort of see this song as being one of Chris's I'm going slightly mad songs. But the way Glenn, as usual, sets it to music is just absolutely masterful. It's a difficult lyric. If you imagine yourself in Glenn's place reading that lyric, what are you going to do? How are you going to turn this into a song? Are you going to do a sort of jaunty Squeeze thing? Are you going to do something a bit more left field, a bit strange? Think of Stranger on the Shore from Sweets from a Stranger, which this also reminds me of a little bit. Or are you going to go somewhere different with it? Which I think Glenn probably did with this track. What I've always liked about it is that it doesn't really sound like anything else in the Squeeze canon. It doesn't really sound like anything they've done before. And it doesn't really sound like... My cat is just clawing the carpet down there. It doesn't really sound like anything else that they were going to go on to do. It doesn't sound really like anything else on this album. It's a strange song. It's a curious song. And it was also a strange song, I think, to start the album. Not necessarily what you think of as a classic album opener. But I just think it works really, really well. The synths... Tilbrook's vocals, I think, are brilliant. It's just a very powerful vocal performance. I know it's one that they really liked. Chris and Glenn, I think, were quite fond of this song. They speak about it highly in Song by Song by Jim Drury. That's a book we need to look at some point. But yeah, I think just an excellent track. It was a song that relaunched Squeeze in 1985. One of the best songs on this album for sure, and I think it set the bar high, definitely. So anyway, let me know what you think. Big Beng, is it a favourite track of yours? Leave some comments below, and I hope to be back soon. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click like and click the bell notification icon, all those things. Let's try and grow the channel as quickly as we can and get talking about Squeeze. So that'll do for now. Take care, and I'll see you soon.